Good evening and welcome. It is truly a pleasure to have you here. This is the National Conversation on Educational Access and Equity, an important topic for this community and for every community in our country. And we have the pleasure of having the National Archives and Records Administration host it here, and it's part of the Amending America initiative. I'm Renan Saenz. I'm the chairman of the board of the museum here, and I was telling the Honorable Archivist of the United States, we always dreamed that this would be exactly what this museum would do. In the mornings, it would host 40 buses of children, and in the afternoons and in the evenings, we would discuss the most important issues affecting America here. So thank you for being here. It is really a pleasure to introduce David Ferriero. He is the 10th Archivist of the United States and was confirmed as such on November 6, 2009. The National Archives and Records Administration is responsible for preserving and providing access to all of the records of the U.S. government. Think about it for a moment. 43 facilities around the country, 14 presidential libraries, 13 billion pages of records, 42 million photographs, miles of film, and just imagine what you can do with electronic records. Mr. Ferriero served as the Andrew Mellon Director of the New York Public Libraries and also held top positions at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and at Duke. He earned a bachelor's and a master's degree in English literature from Northeastern University, and then a master's degree in Simmons College in Library and Information Science. He was a Navy hospital corpsman in Vietnam and served our country that way. Without further ado, the Honorable David S. Ferriero.
Thank you, Hernan. And welcome. In 2014, I participated in a civil rights summit at the LBJ Presidential Library to mark the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The summit brought together 4 U.S. presidents, civil rights leaders, scholars, and activists together to discuss the future of civil rights advocacy in America. One of the most important takeaways for me was the realization that there is so much more to say about the rights and justice 52 years after the signing of the Civil Rights Act. And the idea for the National Conversations was born out of this need to continue these crucial discussions. As a federal agency, the National Archives is responsible for the Charters of Freedom, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, and for the collection and protection of, as you heard, 13 billion other records that tell the American story and its continued challenges and successes towards creating a more perfect union. We've chosen the 225th anniversary of the ratification of the Bill of Rights to feature an exhibit, Amending America, in the Lawrence F. O'Brien Gallery at the National Archives Museum in Washington. As a permanent home of the Bill of Rights, no institution is better poised than the National Archives to not only celebrate the anniversary of this extraordinary document, but also explore its meanings for civil rights today. We want to use this moment to engage Americans in conversations about complicated issues such as class, gender politics, race, religion, and sexual orientation through the national conversations. The content of the discussions will build on the National Archives holdings, connecting key fundamental documents to the challenges before us. But our larger goal is more ambitious: to advance discussion of these crucial issues in communities across the nation and bring to the forefront challenges to rights and justice that persist 225 years after the ratification of the Bill of Rights. From public schools to charter schools to vouchers for private schools to homeschooling to standardized testing to the cost of higher education and whether it's worth it, education in the United States is a hot topic these days. President Donald Trump has called education the civil rights issue of our time. In his address to Congress last week, the president called upon lawmakers to pass an education bill that funds school choice for disadvantaged youth, including millions of African Americans and Latino children. These families should be free to choose the public, private, charter, magnet, religious, or homeschool that is right for them. He also shined a light on the historically black colleges and universities by signing an executive order recognizing their importance and pledged support of their shared mission of bringing education and opportunity to all people. In addition, he signed bills supporting business programs for women and encouraging them to pursue careers in math and science. On the other side of the political spectrum, Democrats are committed to early childhood education and universal preschool programs. They want to make good public schools available to every child, and that all students should be taught to high academic standards. They believe higher education should be accessible to everyone. They recognize education as one of the most pressing economic issues for the future. And for the next generation to be competitive and successful, American students need higher education, but without the crippling student debt. One thing both sides do agree on is that every child should have an equal opportunity to get a great education, regardless of their zip code. At the National Archives, we use our records as educational tools. We offer an array of programs throughout the country: lectures, symposia, performances, film programs, family day programs, adult workshops, teacher and student tours and workshops, collaborative programs with community partners like cultural and educational institutions, and college-credited online courses for educators. We provide educational resources through Docs Teach, our online tool for teaching with documents. We support the National History Day program for students to study and learn about historical issues at events at our locations across the country. We have an ongoing web-based program that reaches students in their classroom nationally and internationally. Here in Texas, the National Archives participates in Connect to Texas, a network of Texas-based educational content providers, including museums, cultural, historical, and scientific organizations, and authors, including the Perot Museum. They utilize interactive video conferencing to deliver live educational programs and professional development to school children and educators across the country. One class we have is for kindergarten through second grade. Students are introduced to the concept of rights, discuss why rights are important, and learn about the Bill of Rights with Sammy, the American bald eagle puppet. All of our educational programs and tools draw from the National Archives holdings. Several National Archives locations across the country, as well as other cultural institutions, such as the Perot Museum, have hosted the National Conversations. Our first one, concerning civil rights and individual freedom, was held in the Jimmy Carter Library in Atlanta in May with President Carter. Subsequent conversations, including LGBTQ, human and civil rights, women's rights and gender equality, and immigration, barriers, and access, were held last year in Chicago, New York City, and Los Angeles. Our culminating event, Building a More Perfect Union, will take place in Washington later this year. I want to express our gratitude to our partner, the National Archives Foundation, for supporting this series, and a big thanks goes to our lead sponsor for Amending America, AT&T, as well as the Ford Foundation and Seedlings Foundation for their belief in and support of the National Archives Conversations. And now it's my pleasure to turn you over to Patrick Madden, who is the Executive Director of the National Archives Foundation.
Good evening. As a nonprofit partner to the National Archives, with the National Archives Foundation, saw the National Conversations for Rights and Justice, the series as a moment to engage the nation in a conversation about class, gender, and race in a changing America. Now, of course, we set out to host a national conversation in cities around the country. We couldn't predict what would happen in the politics and the results of the 2016 election cycle, but It's been a fascinating backdrop for what we have facilitated through these thoughtful engagements and conversations about timeless issues around individual rights in the modern era. And tonight, we look at the American school system, equal access to education. As we looked at host cities, we didn't have to look too far, and we didn't question that Dallas was the right place for a rigorous discussion around education access, as Dallas has been among the localities leading the nation in thoughtful dialogue around education policy. We're grateful for the Perot Museum's partnership, which allows us to continue their tradition as a model of community engagement, reaching outside their walls into the community through distance learning programs. And AT&T has been a terrific partner, not only to today's discussion, but bringing the entire national conversation to life. They've been with us on this journey, providing support and cooperation in each of our events across the nation. With that, I'd like to introduce Nicole Anderson, the AVP of Social Innovation, the president of the AT&T Foundation. She oversees the AT&T philanthropic programs, including AT&T Aspire, a $350 million commitment to drive innovation in education. I know AT&T's commitment is known to many of you in this room and those watching online, that they're committed to education reform. We're grateful for their generosity, their continued engagement and enthusiasm as we step out of the archives and with you tonight. Nicole.
Good evening. On behalf of AT&T, it's an honor to be with you here today in our hometown of Dallas. Thank you, Patrick, and the National Archives for orchestrating these important conversations across our country. And thank you to the Perot Museum for hosting us in your beautiful facility. My boys love coming here for the dinosaur exhibits, if you haven't checked them out. But I'm happy to be here tonight to talk to you about a topic they don't like as much, school, and to talk about the important issue of educational access and equity for all students. All of us at AT&T are proud to be part of this year-long celebration, elevating a conversation that is very much a part of our history, our present, and our future. AT&T's 140-year history has evolved alongside the history of our nation, and our company's story, much like our nation's, is one of passion, of innovation, and of people committed to making things better. Just like we never stop looking for the next solution that makes life easier and keeps us all connected, we also know that a better nation, one firmly rooted in justice, requires constant work, because justice is not something suddenly realized. It's a continual journey towards a better tomorrow. And access to quality education is a critical component of this journey, and something AT&T has supported for a long time. So if you'll allow me a little trip down memory lane, in 1959, AT&T provided special coaxial circuits for an early test of closed-circuit educational TV in Hagerstown, Maryland. Such circuits were later adopted to provide specialized coursework in schools around the country. In 1960, we established the Bell System Aid to Science program, also known as Bell Kits, which included experiments, instructional aids, and curriculum guides for science classes nationwide. Skipping ahead to 1995, AT&T developed and widely distributed the Highways, Hubs, and Networks curriculum, designed to provide teachers at all grade levels and from all diverse backgrounds with tools, lesson guides, and activities to explain technology and its role in contemporary society. And now, with our signature philanthropic initiative, AT&T Aspire, which was launched in 2008, we continue to accelerate the learning revolution and connect it to the young kids who need it most. The national high school graduation rate now has hit an all-time high of 82.3%, up more than 10 percentage points over the last dozen years. But despite this progress, we still have currently 1 out of 5 students, and about 28% of African Americans and 24% of Hispanic students fail to graduate with their class. And closer to home, here in North Texas, less than 1/3 of high school students show proficiency in math or science, and 33% of high school students who took the ACT or SAT scored at college-ready level. So much work remains to be done, but we know we aren't in this fight alone. We're invigorated on a daily basis by the intentional focus on improving access and quality education by community, governmental, and corporate leaders in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, some of whom you'll hear from tonight. And we're proud as AT&T to work with organizations like Year Up, City Year, Urban Teacher, helping to bring them to our community so young people can thrive. It's also why we became an industry partner with the Dallas ISD Pathways to Technology Early College High School, or PTEC, at Seagoville High School, and why our employees continue to mentor at-risk high school students. More than 22,000 Dallas students have been mentored over a 4-year period by AT&T employees. And we do that because we need that bench. We need that bench of talent to continue to fuel the passion for innovation that pushes our company forward. At AT&T, we aspire to remove barriers to academic success and career growth and help all students, regardless of their age, their gender, their income level, or their zip code, make their biggest dreams a reality. So together, we are humbled to work with all of you in building a better tomorrow for our kids. Thank you.
And now we're going to view the introductory film featuring Congressman John Lewis, narrated by our own Cokie Roberts, Amending America.
The Constitution is a living document. It is not static. As citizens, we need to make it real, not just for some of us, but for all of us. The phrase "with liberty and justice for all" mean all. We're one people. We're one family. We're the American family.
The discovery of an individual's liberty is one of the foundational values of being an American citizen. America has been struggling to define the rights and justices associated with that liberty since the creation of its Constitution. From this struggle evolved the monumental Bill of Rights and 17 more amendments to define and protect our liberties. Over time, the amendment process has been tested by a nation whose national sense of liberty, equality, and the inclusion of all citizens evolved with turbulence and struggle.
When we were planning the March on Washington in August of 1963, I would hear Dr. King say things like, "We must learn to live together as brothers and sisters. If not, we will perish as fools."
Freedom, true freedom, is not given by governments. Freedom is taken by the people. The people of America are becoming aware that this freedom to their fellow human beings, and I call them human rights, are theirs to give.
The issues that compel America to continue to define equality and fairness, I think it's innate. I really believe that it's in our soul, that we believe in freedom, freedom of the individual. We believe that humans have a right to peacefully coexist with fellow human beings.
So there are two monumental statues on the Pennsylvania Avenue side of the National Archives building. One inscribed, "Study the Past," the other, "What is Past is Prologue." The message is we should be able to learn from our history so that we're not repeating the same mistakes over and over. And the role of the National Archives is to ensure that people have access to the records that demonstrate how those rights were achieved so that we can learn from those records.
With over 11,000 proposed amendments to the Constitution, and only 27 of those actually ratified, our pursuit of rights and justice continues to be a vibrant part of our democracy. It's up to every generation of Americans to own our democracy and continue this national dialogue of defining our personal liberties.
It is very, very important for all of us as citizens, for all of us as one people, to take ownership of our system of justice. This is our democracy. It belongs to all of us. We must talk about it. We must debate it. We have to continue to fight every single day. If we do not, we will go backward. We don't want to go backward. We want to go forward and complete our effort to create a more perfect union.
And now I'd like to introduce our speakers for the keynote conversation on quality education for everyone. First is my friend Cokie Roberts. She is a familiar name around Washington, D.C. and around the United States and the world. She's a political commentator for ABC News, where she previously co-anchored the ABC Sunday morning show This Week. She's also a contributor to NPR Morning Edition, where she once was congressional correspondent. In her more than 40 years in broadcasting, which she doesn't like me to talk about 40 years, she has won countless awards, including 3 Emmys. She's been inducted into the Broadcasting and Cable Hall of Fame and was cited by the American Women in Radio and Television as one of the 50 greatest women in the history of broadcasting. In addition to her reporting, Roberts has written 6 New York Times bestsellers, most dealing with the roles of women in U.S. history. She's been active in National Archives projects for a number of years and is vice president of the National Archives Foundation. The Library of Congress named her a living legend, one of the very few Americans to have attained that honor. I couldn't agree more. Joining Cokie is Greg Fleischer, the president of National Math and Science Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering teachers and equipping students with the STEM knowledge and skills they need to thrive in college and the workforce of the 21st century. As president, Greg serves as the initiative's key liaison with school district leaders, state and national STEM education partners, and public and private funders, while providing strategic direction and oversight of the initiative's proven programs. He started his career as an auditor and actuary, but found his true passion as a math teacher. He taught high school math for 14 years in Dallas Independent School District, where his work at the district level led to unprecedented student performance in advanced placement calculus, particularly among traditionally underrepresented students. Previously, Greg served as president of AP Strategies, Inc., where he successfully implemented education programs focused on improving student participation and performance in rigorous math and science courses over 70 districts across the state of Texas. The success of AP Strategies led to the formation of the National Math and Science Initiative as a public-private partnership in 2007. Under his leadership, the programs have grown to reach more than 1,000 high schools and 45 universities and are producing measurable and lasting results for more than 50,000 teachers and 1.5 million students across 40 states. Greg currently serves on the Board of Trustees for the College Board, Head Start, Greater Dallas, and the Perot Museum Council, and on the Education Advisory Council for Code.org. Please welcome Cokie and Greg.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, David, for that nice introduction. Greg, thank you for having us in your house, here on this board. And it actually is very appropriate that we're here in the Perot Museum, not only because it is a wonderful educational institution in itself, but I was thinking about it today. And back in 1992, when Ross Perot was running for president, I came to Texas to do a piece called, for a special that we did, called Who is Ross Perot? Texas knew the answer to that question, but America didn't necessarily. And my segment of it was to talk about the work he had done on educational reform in Texas. And he had done absolutely yeoman work. And I was thinking about it because, not only because I was here, but last week I was in Austin and I was at the LBJ school. And I was thinking the first time I had ever been there was to interview Barbara Jordan. And it was to interview her about Ross Perot and the Texas education reform. And she was so supportive of his efforts. She said he basically hired every lobbyist in the state, but which is a smart thing to do. But and it made me think about how there was a time in our history, not that long ago, when people who didn't necessarily agree on everything could agree on the things they agreed on and work together and get something important done. And that was the case in that initiative, which was highly successful at the time. You know, you have to renew these things from time to time. But it was sort of with that in mind that I thought would start this conversation tonight. And Greg, you just heard David quote President Trump saying that education is the civil rights issue of our time. You have said, when you have been asked, what's the biggest problem in education? You've said low expectations of students of low socioeconomic background. Are you two saying the same thing?
Well, I can't speak for President Trump, but I do know that what I've seen, the difference between a student who goes to a school and achieves great things and goes to a school that maybe doesn't, is the expectation that that school has for that student. It's the expectations that the teachers have, that the school has, that the district has, and that is the core of everything that really is the differentiator for schools that are successful with students, traditionally underrepresented students, and those who are successful. And it's not only that, it's the expectations the students have of themselves that the school environment creates. And it really all starts from there.
But, you know, many people would say that the problem is the achievement of those students rather than the expectations of them. You say that one flows from the other.
Yeah, absolutely. That in order to achieve what is expected of society of the students, to be able to graduate from high school, to be able to be successful in college and have a fruitful life, it starts with, do the adults believe in the students at an early age? You could go to school districts across the country, and in the same school district, you can go to one school that has students that are doing extremely well, the same socioeconomic and same background of another school with students with the same type of background that are not achieving. And it has to do with, do the adults start to believe in the students? Because if that doesn't happen, the students don't believe in themselves, they're not stretched, and they don't gain all the information and knowledge that they need to do.
As you well know, and as David alluded to, the debates going on right now in educational policy are all about choice, you know, and public schools versus charter schools versus private schools versus vouchers versus homeschooling, all of that. But it sounds to me like you're saying that's not the argument we should be having, that it's not about where you're at school, it's how you're educated once you're there.
Well, yeah, I think I think everyone believes that parents shouldn't have to uproot their families for their children to get a rigorous education. I think that, there's a great place for charter schools, which are public schools, and traditional public schools in our society. I don't know if I saw on the list there, is Rosemary Perlmutter? I saw that she signed up. She started Uplift Education, one of the great charter systems in Dallas. And some charter systems are doing amazing things, absolutely amazing things with low-income students that traditional public schools are not necessarily doing. we at the National Math and Science Initiative really work with all schools, and we equip teachers and empower students, as David so eloquently said, with the STEM knowledge they need to be able to thrive. But the key for us, the key is that it's for us. The fact is, 90% of all schools are traditional public schools, and if we as a society, are going to really make a difference, we have to address the traditional public schools. We absolutely think that that the charter systems and other possible choices play a part in that, but if we don't address that, the 90%, we're not going to make a difference in the society.
So basically, it's not a philosophical question; it's a practical question.
Right, exactly. Is that it's going to take, even no matter how much money is going to be poured in to choice and charters, it's going to take many decades for the traditional public schools not to have a huge majority of the students in the country.
So I want to get into how your program works and all of that. But before that, I want to just get to the basics, take a step back, and talk about why STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, why those programs are so important. You've pointed out that 60% of the new jobs created in this country require now more than a secondary education. And that the workforce could be 3 million workers short. 3 million skilled workers short next year if we don't do something fast. This is a very serious question.
Yeah, and so STEM education it's really a national security issue at this point. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. Why is this important? And it's just, you could look at what's happening in the news in terms of, I think there's a few email hacks going around, and that if we do not have a STEM literate and STEM proficient society, then we really risk being the economic, technological, military power that we currently hold. It's absolutely just vital. One of the early supporters of our work was the Office of Naval Research, and they need more technology than just about anybody else in terms of military might, and they recognize.
Why is that? Why do they need more than the Air Force?
Well, is anybody in the Air Force here? I need to be careful. We do have. So the Navy, the Navy is one of the. I think I'll skip that. But it's what the Office of Naval Research, and also we actually have support from the Air Force and the Army also, and the Marines.
He's tap dancing really fast.
Coast Guard. It's interesting because they recognize that if they are not producing a STEM proficient graduate that is going to go into college, and they recognize what we do with our program. One of our programs is that we dramatically increase the number of students matriculating into STEM careers and graduating with STEM degrees by working with starting.
I want to come back to how you do it, but
Okay.
but so you're saying basically that absent this, we're at a disadvantage competitively and in terms of our national security.
Absolutely, and I think that it's more evident every day with what's happening in the news. It's just today.
So is it exacerbated by the fact that that now the majority of our college graduates are female, and women are less likely to go into the STEM fields? I mean, out of 40, but I think the workforce is something like 48% female, and only 24% are in STEM fields.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to, all of our citizens, we have to, give the same opportunity, to. I mean, if you look at, the latest research and data, that girls, when they're in middle school, they're just as excited and about going into STEM careers, and something happens around middle school that by the time they get to high school and graduate, they're not interested anymore. And that's one of the things that we address.
But my point is that if something happens to boys by the time they get to college, that they don't go in the same numbers as girls, and they certainly don't graduate in the same numbers as girls. So the fact that you now have your vast majority of college graduates being female, and they're not the people going into
Right.
STEM.
Yeah, absolutely. It needs to be the fact that we need to be able to produce as many graduates into STEM, and you're right. If the ratio of females to males into STEM, we certainly would have more producing more STEM graduates if girls did that. It's a math problem. I can handle that. I can handle that one.
So there's a clear need.
Yeah.
Right. So then we get to what you do about it. And that's where your program comes in. And as far as I can tell, a lot of your answer goes to teachers, to the fundamental question of who's standing in front of that classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many well-meaning folks who want to support education. We see it. Been in over 500 school districts, and there is no program that will work unless the teachers buy into it. If it's forced upon them, it just is not going to work. No matter how well designed the program is. I just had a conversation last week with some folks at Stanford who have this wonderful program on how to teach logic. And they called me and they wanted to know, how do we implement this into the schools? And it's a great program that is producing great things at Palo Alto High School right now. It's one high school, they want to know how to scale it. And the first thing that people don't realize is that unless they train teachers and can get them to buy in and be champions of that work, nothing's going to happen. If it comes from the district, if it comes from the state, if it comes from the government, it doesn't matter, because what happens in that classroom, the teacher has to own and buy into it. And that's what our experience is.
And you came to that, as David was introducing you, as a teacher yourself, that you decided after being an actuary that, which I can see why you didn't want to keep doing that, but the teaching math was what you really had always wanted to do, and so then you went and did it.
Yeah, I went from being an actuary to a high school math teacher. I try to tell my wife, who always wants newer, nicer things, that she married the wrong guy. But I think a lot of teachers, and I know there's some teachers in the audience that it's really more of a calling. It's something I've always wanted to do. But when I saw the movie in the late '80s, Stand and Deliver, it really motivated me and inspired me to teach calculus and to try to get students. I'm going like, if Jaime Escalante could do it, surely I could do it. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but and it's something that I saw the difference that he made in the lives of those students, and I wanted to do the same thing. And
so then when you started doing it, what did you find was missing, or that you could bring to other students? Yeah,
it's for me, I was successful because as a teacher back then, because I think the students knew that I desperately wanted them to do well, and the expectations I had of them, I was willing to make of myself. If I had, there's actually a former student who's in the audience who's head of City Year in Dallas. So Alex, good. Don't say anything here. And it's something where I try to make it engaging, and but I think that any teacher can be successful. Students know if teachers care about them. And especially traditionally underrepresented students, they need to know that first. And if that happens, no matter what the curriculum, no matter how it's presented, great things can happen.
But it doesn't just happen. You do need some help along the way, and that's what you've been doing. You teach.
That's right.
Where you have 88%, I think, of the teachers that you have in the program go into the classroom, and 5 years later, 80% are still there, as opposed to 65% in the population as a whole. So how does that happen?
So it's a great point. So we have a program, the You Teach expansion program. It's a marriage between the colleges of natural arts and sciences and College of Education to produce more highly qualified math and science teachers. And what we do with that program, and it's University of Texas at Austin is a great partner for us. We train the teachers in the latest pedagogy, but also what I'm talking about in terms of being excited and motivating, one of the key tenets of that program is that early on, when they're freshmen or their first year, they go into student teaching. So they know if they have a passion for it right away. So the students who are in that program.
Freshmen in college.
Freshmen in college, yes, thank you. So they know right away, which is not typical when you're talking about traditional education programs. So by the time they graduate, they know that they have the passion and that they care about it. And that is really something that is absolutely key. So they're not only trained with the best content, the best pedagogy, the best project-based learning, they're also the program the teacher that produces the teachers produces teachers who are passionate and care about the kids and will do anything to get to be successful. My oldest daughter is a freshman in high school, and her pre-AP biology teacher is a You Teach teacher. So
makes you feel good,
yeah.
right? But so these are for teachers in training, right?
Absolutely, producing pre-service teachers.
So and what about for teachers who already are teaching?
So we have a college readiness program that produces just fantastic results, and it's what we do is we provide a tremendous amount of extra training for the teachers. We provide them with mentors, who provide expert mentors for them. We have more time on task for students. We have awards based on success. And the program has been so successful that basically without a development director, that we raised over $200 million just based on the results of this program. And just here in Dallas, the #1 school in the entire country that produces the most African American and Hispanic students passing advanced placement math and science exams. The #1 in the country is right here in Dallas. You think of, and it's science and engineering, which is not too far from here. Every single school in the country. And the another school in Dallas, Talented and Gifted, is rated #1 by U.S. News and World Report and other outlets in terms of AP performance that really get students to do well in college. And so how do you do something like that to take two schools that when we started with them were producing just a few kids to be able to do well in these courses? It takes a lot of very focused effort and understanding. One of the things we really do well at the National Math and Science Initiative, we know exactly what type of intervention will produce what results based on a bunch of data to be able to do that. And so for existing schools, we work with the schools where they are, and we produce gains that are 10 times the national average. Now, there's lots of challenging schools that we still need to do more and more to really get the number of graduates and number of students going to college. But the gains we are making are better by far than anybody else.
Well, one of the things that I've read that you feel is that having a specific goal for the teacher makes a big difference. And in your case, what your basic view is that the specific goal should be that kids pass AP exams.
Yeah, it's another thing that we do unique in education, and Commit is doing some great work around metrics. But one thing that we've done for quite a while that's been really successful, we provide one number for the teacher, for the school, for the district. And everyone knows what success is, and everyone knows exactly how to achieve that. And not only that, we provide all the tools and resources needed to be able to achieve. And that number is how many students are expected to achieve on advanced placement, math and science, and we also have English because engineers need to know how to read and write. But
Concept.
But I figured that you might.
Yeah.
And the reason why we use advanced placement as a metric, because for students, and the scale is 1 to 5, and 3 is considered either passing or a qualifying score, is that there's really no greater metric in terms of a rigorous metric like doing well on an advanced placement exam as an indicator of matriculating into college and graduating from a degree. That basically every study talks about that and of doing well. There's some controversy on whether students who don't do necessarily that well, how much it helps them for college. Most actually point to that students scoring a 2 on the exam, it really does. But that's why we use that as a metric for K-12 to try to achieve our end state, which is more STEM literate society, more STEM proficient society, and more STEM graduates.
And what you say is that African American and Hispanic kids who pass an AP exam are 3 times more likely to get a bachelor's.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, and every study, especially for traditionally underrepresented and females in math and science, and it's something where if we want to get more students to be successful in graduating from a 4-year degree from a tier 1 university, this is what needs to happen. I spoke to the last year to the defense industry, and I talked to them about
Just the Navy?
No, not just the Navy. This was BAE, Boeing, Northrop, and no, we like the other branches. And I talked to them about if they survey all their incoming engineers, who for these organizations, take a look back. If you backtrack it in high school, what is it that's in common that all these engineers achieved in high school to be able to graduate with an engineering degree and get a job with one of these great organizations? Advanced placement and doing well in advanced placement in calculus and physics is absolutely a vital indicator to be able to achieve that type of job.
I know you've taken some flack for the rewards that you give to both teachers and students for doing this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The program started in Texas. It was originally the brainchild of a Dallas philanthropist named Peter O'Donnell, who was on the White House Commission for the Super Collider project, big hole in the ground in Waxahachie. And it's still there, isn't it? Yeah. And his charge from the White House was to make the genius engineers who are moving, coming from Philip Exeter to DeSoto, to make the schools more attractive. And so what he decided was actually put a little capitalism in a socialistic system. Teachers back then, we used to say teachers get paid the same whether they show film strips every day or whether they're working 20 hours a day. And so he came up with this model. And when we expanded it, in Texas, giving students some incentives and teachers incentives, it was fine, not that much controversy. There's more controversy around the students, which I'll get to in a second. But as we expand this nationally, unbelievably, people care about paying teachers especially. We give students a reward. It's $100 if they get a qualifying score on the advanced placement exam. And what it really does for us, it does 2 things. If I would take you, and you could take me up on this, to any school in the country right now, any pre-calculus class, it's March, kids are signing up for the next year's class, and if we ask all the juniors, how many are going to take calculus next year? Maybe half will raise their hand. If you and I say, you get $100 if you score 3 or greater on the AP exam, how many will take calculus? A lot more raise their hand. So it helps us change the culture more quickly in a school that, in many cases, in that it's AP is the cool thing to do, especially for students who don't see themselves, who look like themselves in the classes. And it also helps the last couple months of school where kids are graduating to make sure that they really dig in, and creates a nice atmosphere. For teachers, it's interesting that we've been accused of wanting to instill, merit pay, across the country. And what's funny is that, we designed this. Peter O'Donnell called on me, quickly after he started this program, the Super Collider project, and we designed some things in Dallas together. What's amazing, there was never even a talk about merit pay. We just had a program that worked. And I've met with many union leaders, national union leaders, behind closed doors. They know that paying AP teachers based on students' AP performance, if there's any type of merit pay that really isn't controversial, it's something like that. Now, they still when the doors open, they're not going to support that because they feel it's a slippery slope to something much greater. And then, but for it's part of our program, and it works. I mean, we get these results that nobody else is getting, and it's a key component for our program to reward teachers based on the extra work.
So if you go into a school and your goal is to get kids into AP and to get teachers who are able to do that and work with those kids, there've got to be kids who can't do that, right? Yeah. And so what are you doing about that?
So that's a great question. So we basically, there's great programs that serve students who are at risk to graduate high school. We basically serve the top 50 to 75% of the school. And when or the school and its feeder patterns, we start at a much earlier grade level to get with training teachers to make everything vertically aligned. And we do that where it's really, we try to reach the top 75% to have, on average, to be able to achieve this. We are not the panacea for all education, but when we're talking about getting more students and more traditionally underrepresented students prepared for college and to do well in college, we're pretty good at that.
So you've also said that we're going to need 100,000 more math and science teachers by 2020.
I think President Obama mentioned that too.
How do we do that?
Well, it's a lot of interventions like what's happening with the U-Teach program. We're working with other universities, and we're looking at other ways to be able to try to entice more and more teachers into STEM education. We work with Teach for America. We're trying to look at all certain avenues. When we report to the White House, because they care about this 100,000 number, we represent maybe 10, 15% of all the organizations working on this. So there's lots of other organizations working on this. We're doing our part by producing more STEM teachers. With this U-Teach program, these are teachers who are math and science majors who still graduate with a math and science degree and a teaching certificate. So they were not going to go into teaching. These are brand new teachers in the pipeline.
So how many are we talking about?
Communications director is right over there. I think
ballpark.
Yeah, I think that right now our enrollment is about what we're looking for is about 20,000 by 2022 to be able to produce those number of teachers in the 45 universities.
So when you say that your organization has reached 50,000 teachers, we're talking about people who are already teaching?
Correct. Yeah, that's existing teachers. We've trained 50,000 teachers in the existing districts, and in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll hopefully produce, I believe it's about 20,000 more.
And as David said earlier, you're now in 40 states, right?
Correct.
So how do you do that? I mean, how do you get to scale like that?
Yeah, it's all because of the Navy.
There you go. It's back to the Navy.
That's right. We've had wonderful partners. We've had government support. We've had from the Department of Defense. We are part of the former First Lady and Dr. Biden's Joining Force Initiative to serve military communities. We have wonderful corporate support. We have a lot of schools and school districts who fund the entire program. Speaking of choice and charters, there's a great charter network here in Texas called IDEA, and they recognize that they're one of the best charter networks in the country. I think 55% of their students graduate from college. It's like 100% low income, and they recognize that what they needed was more students to be successful on advanced placement exams, even boost their graduate rate even more. So we have the way we go about that is, our results speak for themselves. They're really unique. And the other thing is that we are able to tell donors and schools exactly, if they invest with us, what the student outcomes will be. And we deliver on those results. We're it's something that unique that we do for our funders. we tell them if they invest with us, here's the current state of how many students are doing this, and if you give us this amount, this is exactly what will happen. And because we constantly deliver on our promises, the word spread that we are a good steward.
So you talked about the military families, and I know your college readiness program does focus to some degree on military families, right?
Right. It's a part of it.
So are you getting pushback on this? I mean, David sort of referenced it. There's so much feeling now that college is so expensive and that people are coming out with so much debt. And a lot of questioning of, is it worth it? It was fascinating to me during this campaign year. The number of people, when I asked what their biggest problem was, said debt. People of every, college debt, people of every age, because either they were paying it or their kids were paying it, whatever. So does that become a pushback when you're saying these are your goals?
You know, in order for if anybody wants to go in the workforce, if anybody wants to have a career, they still need the critical thinking skills that our program and some other programs produce. To be successful, even if you're going into a career right after high school or go to a 2-year college, you still need the critical thinking skills that these rigorous courses teach the teachers to impart to the students. So whether it's worth it, that's probably a much broader debate, and I think I would need some more data on it. But right now, it's of the post-recession from 2010 on, I think it was 11.5 million out of 11.6 million, 99% of the new jobs required some college education. So that's just a fact. So without that, in order currently to get the type of job that's needed to have a productive and good life, you need some type of college education. The costs and whether it's worth it or not, the fact is that if you're going to get a job, you need to have something.
Well, in fact, the statistics are pretty interesting. With each degree you get, the unemployment rate among people of that degree drops by about half.
Right.
From high school to 2 years of college to 4 years of college to master's and a professional degree. But then it goes back up again for PhDs. So watch out there.
That's right.
But,
so as a lesson, please don't get too much education.
or be careful what you have it in. So when you say you can show people these metrics, and you're clearly very attached to the data, and I understand why, but what do you see looking out so now the program's been in effect how many years?
The program started in southern Dallas County in 1990, so it's actually been 25 years.
So now you've got kids who have been out of college for a period of time, and what does that data show?
Yeah, we have some great studies. We have a Cornell economist who did a really rigorous study on us. It shows that students graduating from our program have a significantly higher likelihood not to graduate from college, but we also looked at the wage earnings in Texas, and it's significant, the number of students going through our program versus matched students, the number of just the wage that, living wage that they are able to make, and also the number of, STEM graduates that it's producing.
As I started by saying, we are sort of in turmoil about a lot of things in the country, but yes, but education is one of them.
Yeah.
And we have a new Secretary of Education. If you could, be the cricket on her shoulder, what would you tell Betsy DeVos?
Yeah, and we hope to meet with her soon. The one thing that we would say is that to invest in programs that have meaningful and proven results. There are so many different programs out there, and results in terms of student outcomes. What type of student outcomes do we want to achieve? Certainly, high school graduation. The work that AT&T is doing, the 83.2%, is that right? And I mean, that's great. And but college graduation, and what are the programs that are producing these type of metrics that we all want for our students? And as some of the things that Commit is doing at the earlier grade levels, what are the key indicators at 4th grade reading, at 8th grade, and things like that, to invest in programs that have these type of proven results. And that is, that's what I would tell her. That's hopefully what we will tell her.
I'm going to turn it over to you all for questions, and just after one more question here, which is that you did reference the earlier things, and I notice you're on the Head Start board.
Yeah.
So is high school already late?
Well, we definitely start earlier. We start, our program starts all the way down to the 3rd grade. But, as we can't just throw away students who currently are in high school. So we have to address, we have to address what's happening in high school now, but also start earlier to, get a better pipeline so that high school students where it's not too late. So that's really what our philosophy. But some of the preschool work is just absolutely vital. For my own kids, when they start kindergarten and they know, hopefully they knew all 26 letters and had a vocabulary of X amount of words. For those students who aren't starting at that same level, they already start so far behind. So the preschool work is just so vital and so important. And I love my work with Head Start because I see the impact it makes early on, and hopefully, working with the school district, hopefully those gains that are made early on will sustain through 3rd grade and on after that.
So, questions from the audience. Do we have microphones going around, or is it just?
They have cards in their packets, the yellow cards. If they have a question, they can write it on the card and pass it.
All right, can you hear that? You have yellow cards in your packet, and you can write a question, and then apparently something will happen. Yeah, how about that? Yeah.
I'm curious.
Thank you.
It's kind of a two-part question, but do your teachers get any type of training in anti-bias, power, privilege training?
It's
Or and also your staff? Please repeat it.
so the
Question?
question
Okay,
was, do teachers have basically a cultural diversity training?
But anti-bias.
Anti-bias. So we're really working on that as an organization. We just had an event in St. Louis. We work with St. Louis Public Schools, where we had 300 students for a screening of Hidden Figures, and we had folks from the Department of Education and the school district and some other leaders in industry. And we really are, it's actually a big push for us right now. Historically, we haven't, but we recognize the big need for that, and we're really working on that. And I really appreciate that question because it's been a hot topic within our organization. We've been so focused on content, pedagogy, results, but now we recognize, especially with the society now, we really need to address that and do something about it.
Well, and the reason why I asked that is because at the very beginning you talked about low expectations being one of the linchpins.
Yeah.
And do adults believe in the students? And I don't know how much equity or anti-bias or power and privilege training you've gone through, but when you use language like that, it places a blame on the adults who those kids are, whether that be the parents or whether that be the teachers who you just acknowledged aren't getting that type of training. And what I want to do is just offer you this, and this came from an article.
Okay, but can we get to a question, please?
Oh, yeah. He said, systemic lack of investment, a legacy of segregation and racist economic development and housing policies, generations of political disenfranchisement, and the decision made long ago to direct Dallas's booming regional success northwards have all victimized the South and left it far behind the rest of the city. I encourage you to start using language that acknowledges the history of the systemic oppression and the institutional inequity. Because until we start doing that, we can't move forward, both for our teachers
I think we'll talk a lot more about that in the next panel, which is on some of those topics and also more Dallas centric. Whereas this is more of a broader panel, more broader conversation about schools in general.
You can go to any city in the country.
Okay, all right, somebody else. Other questions? Thank you. Yeah, okay. I can't see people because there's a light in my eye, so. Your what did he say?
Former Navy.
And I'm also from Washington, D.C.
Okay.
So my question is, do you all have a concern with this push towards choice? Because we all know what that really means. Now, I may be an individual here, but when you say choice, that's very much coded language for those on that lower end of the socioeconomic scale. They're going to get pushed back because they're not going to have the option or the ability to get to those choices. So how do we reconcile that?
Well, it's interesting. I actually, I'm not an expert on choice and vouchers. I mean, there was something that just came out in vouchers, that some data that was really interesting. But what I do know is that choice, like charter school choices in places like New York City, where, I don't know if you saw the movie Waiting for Superman, it's something where I think choice is absolutely vital for some parents who don't want to uproot their families to be able to get a rigorous education for their students. So I look at it as something that in a more positive way of trying to give parents choices that would give them the best education for their students. But I'm not an expert on that. What I can tell you though is that there are a lot of charter systems that have done amazing things for low-income students, and if those parents were not given those choices, they maybe wouldn't have the same results.
And in fact, in some cities like Detroit, the choice movement came primarily from families of lower economic status who said that they wanted the choice.
And a part of that is just, sorry. So a part of that is just simply, with that choice, then what you have are now huge waiting lists.
Right.
Right.
So if I can't make the waiting list,
Right.
what bumps me up to the waiting list?
Right.
Is it
Yeah.
the fact that that I'm ex-Navy? Is it the fact that I work in the defense sector, that I can call an ex-admiral and say, hey, I need,
No, I agree. The lottery systems are heartbreaking for students who want to get in there and don't.
And in some cases, they're just crazy. I mean, where two children in the same family can't go to the same school, that kind of thing. So it just makes it impossible. There's a question here, are your teacher training programs available to private schools?
Yes. We typically don't, we only really work with public schools. We would work with private schools. The Catholic Diocese here in Dallas wanted to work with us. We'd work with private schools that feel that they have a need and want to have more students be successful in college. A lot of private schools, that's not the case, but in some cases it is. And we absolutely, we have public trainings available for teachers, and private school teachers can attend.
This is somewhat along the same lines as the gentleman earlier. If you consider that the social and behavioral atmosphere of the school has an effect on students.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly does. And what we do, we do our best, and we do a pretty good job of mitigating some of those issues by focusing on very specific outcomes that we want for students.
And this is similar to something I asked you earlier. How will the cost of a college degree impact the rate of graduates pursuing teaching careers? So it's different from, especially those who did not go to school to become teachers, which you said you've dealt with.
It's amazing the altruism of of folks. I mean, I think there's a lot of people like me who wanted to go into teaching because wasn't necessarily monetarily motivated to pursue something else. We've seen there's lots of great organizations like Teach for America. I think City Year does some great things. So I think that, certainly that's always going to be an issue. Teacher pay is always going to be an issue. But, right now there's enough goodwill and good organizations that are doing some great things to get more and more teachers in the pipeline. Even if it's temporarily, even if it's, for a short period of time, the churn is actually producing, quite a few highly qualified teachers.
Other questions from, and yeah, go ahead. Thank you. Are we taking questions from the viewers, people online, Maria? I can't. What was the answer to that?
She nodded yes.
So this says it's $725 for the seminar in Fort Worth. Do you offer scholarships? I teach physics in 8th grade, and I guess DISD, I guess that's Dallas Independent
Whoever that
School
is,
District.
talk to me at the break.
How can we address access to AP? White students here in Dallas are 4 times more likely to take an AP class than Black and Hispanic students.
I'm curious where they get that statistics. Dallas, at least in terms of math and science, if you look at the top, a lot of it's driven by science, the 2 schools that I mentioned, but the African American and Hispanic participation in advanced placement in Dallas is through the roof in terms of with respect to the number of students who are actually in the schools. So once again, at the break, I'd love to geek out with you on some data. We can do that.
And so are we taking questions from the people who are, yes, go ahead, Mr. Flores.
Dallas, in fact, has a record in the state of Texas for more kids taking AP than any other school system.
Yeah, and it's really.
Repeat it, because.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Dallas has a record for more students per capita of taking AP than any other school system in Texas. It's really like that. You can almost say that across the country, and it's a direct correlation and causality of our work. With Dallas, it's been the district that we started with, way back in 1995, and we're really proud of that. Before the original 10 schools in Dallas, before we started with them, there were 29 passing scores in AP Math, Science, English by African American and Hispanic students, fewer than 3 per school. Last year there were 1,480, on average of 148 per school. Of course, there's a wide distribution of that, but it's, once again, nobody has those type of results.
Others, sorry, it's impossible for me to see. Yes. Thank you. Can you discuss the importance to include arts in the STEM education, STEAM?
Yeah, so we actually have an arts program. For those in Dallas, probably know Edith O'Donnell, who has been a big supporter of the arts. And we've had a program for about 15 years. It's isolated, but it's actually in the entire country, I'm going to make sure I get this right, 4 of the top 5 schools in the country that produce the most music theory, advanced placement music theory, and advanced studio art were from the Dallas area in Edith O'Donnell's art program that we actually we run for her. And I think it deserves a broader discussion in terms of a complete type of education. But we are an absolute supporter of arts education.
But do you find that it's hard to get people to support? We're finding in most school districts that art is disappearing from the school.
Well, it's a movement across the country that it's. You're right, but it's getting some momentum that if STEM is really going to be is going to be effective, that arts need to play a big part of it. I think that a lot of people have heard about the correlation between playing the piano and math, and so there's a much broader discussion with that, and there's a lot of momentum.
Well, and you include English for the teachers, right?
Absolutely.
So how does that work? So when you're working with the teachers and you're doing the STEM stuff, then you sort of throw in English?
Well, we include English. We want the students to be proficient in English also. We think it's absolutely vital. You know, it's interesting when we expanded this, and this is how we started it in the super collider schools and in Dallas as math, science, and English. And as when NIMSY was being formed, we talked about just doing math and science only. But we thought it's missing a huge piece to be able to not really empower and equip the students and teachers to really be proficient in what's necessary in advanced English. And we do some great things with, especially the vertical alignment with English is extremely rigorous.
What does that mean?
Well, we talk about what do you do with tone and diction all the way down in 6th grade of how it's going to relate to what you have to do in college, so that that we vertically align all the skills needed at each grade level.
Tell people what vertically aligned
Okay,
means.
thank you very much. Tara, she's doing it for you. Sorry. The vertically, basically so that at each grade level, everyone knows what each other is doing. Think of JV football. Basically JV football in Southlake, they run the exact same plays as the varsity team in Southlake. They have to do a football reference in Texas.
Yes, I'm very used to it.
Yeah.
So what is so now that I know that the JV does the same as the high school.
Maybe I didn't explain it as well as you would like. So it's something where that every teacher, so that we align the skills at each grade level so that it's built upon, because there's so much repetition. If those are teachers in middle school, if you're teaching any course, what you're learning in 6th grade, almost half of 7th grade seems just a repeat. And the same thing, you know, there's some of the standards are addressing this, but there's still so much repetition. And if you vertically align what is really needed at each grade level, it basically maximizes student performance and eliminates some of that repetition.
So after this number of years of doing this, you must have some stories of individuals that you love to tell.
Yeah, when I first started doing this, I remember, for those who were in Dallas, I remember Chad Woolery as a superintendent. When I started teaching at Hillcrest, I would go to him. I said, I want to teach calculus at Carter also. And he said, oh, it's going to be a bigger part of a program. And that's when the O'Donnell Foundation came in. But I eventually, the very first year we started this program, I got to teach, or at least support, at Carter High School and at Woodrow and at Hillcrest. And there was my very first day, there was a student in the front row, and I just taught at Hillcrest. In the front row was a student at Carter who was smarter than any kid I've ever been around. I'm thinking, like, I knew it. I knew these students could be this everywhere. So this student, his name is...
So for those of us who don't know the difference between these schools.
Carter is about 99% African-American high school. Thank you for helping me clarify that. And I think that the community would think it's not a high-achieving school with not high-achieving students. I don't mean to stereotype like that, but I think that the community would have that impression, and it's just simply not true. This one student who, his name is Todd Coleman. He's now a professor, I think, at UCSD of engineering. He went to MIT, was Michigan MIT. He had no confidence in himself because of where he went to school. And one of the great things about advanced placement is that I told him, I said, you're going to easily get the highest score on the exam. And that means that you are as good as anyone who went to Philip Exeter, went to any private school, went to St. Mark's, that you're as good as any student. And it gave him a confidence level when he went into Michigan. And I still keep in touch with him. He started blowing me away in terms of what he knew very early on. But it gave him a confidence that he was as good. And that's one of the things we do love about using advanced placement, because students who don't necessarily go to schools that they think are not as good at other schools, it's a great equalizer. That basically that grade on that exam really shows students exactly where they are.
Well, I think that we have one more here. Okay, is it? Oh, this one's from the web. Okay. So outside of STEM, what makes you optimistic about education? What lessons from STEM can we apply elsewhere?
So what optimistic about education? I think there's so many really, really great people, great organizations, great companies that really deeply care about this. And it is one issue that is very bipartisan. We've had a lot of support from the previous two administrations, and they were obviously of different parties. And we've had, I think it's the one thing that, maybe naively so, that Republicans and Democrats can really come together about in terms of, if they may disagree on some of the ways to go about it, but the outcomes that we want for students, they both want the same thing. And that is something that I think is really exciting and potentially really beneficial for the country.
Well, that's a nice place to end. Thank you very, very much, Greg. It's great to meet you. And so now, I think, what happens now?
I think we take a break.
We take a break. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll begin with the second session. A 10-minute break.
troublemakers, alternatives, indigenous others. I'm getting the fuck out, I'm moving to a land that's made for lovers. Whoa, whoa. I'll let you know when it's time to go. Get close, time to get together, let's go. And it won't be long till we're singing our own damn song. I was made for you and no one else ever mattered the way that you do. You do. All that never mattered. He said you were on your way, that you wanna be alone. We hadn't spoke all day. Well, if you're getting coffee, talk to your family. The old world and the new are both here. I'll be waiting at the beach. Get close, 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 get close. Time to get together, let's go. And it won't be long till we're singing our own damn song. I was made for you and no one else ever mattered the way that you do.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll take your seats, please. We're going to start the second session in just a few minutes.
Well, welcome back, everyone. We have a distinguished panel. Have you ever heard of a panel that wasn't distinguished? But this one really is. Immediately to my right is Michael Sorrell, who many of you in Dallas know is the president of Quinn College, which he has turned around dramatically. And we're eager to hear that story. Next to him is Todd Williams, who is the head of Commit, with an exclamation point, where he is very committed to Dallas Public Schools and has worked with various members of the Dallas government over the years. Next to him is Sharon Schaefer, who was head of education at the Smithsonian for a very long time and is now has a company called Early Learning in Museums. And to her right is Hector Flores. Hi, Mr. Flores. How are you? Who has been very active here in Dallas on civil rights issues, particularly with LULAC. So we have a lot of people who have tremendous expertise, and it is expertise from preschool, really babyhood, all the way through college. So it is a good scope of the learning experience. And counterintuitively, I'm going to start at the top instead of the bottom and go down to the babies. So I'm going to start with you, President Sorrell, because it is quite a story. And the turnaround of Paul Quinn. When you got there, it was a pretty scary place. The buildings were abandoned. The students were barely there. The finances were barely there. And you came in as the temporary president, and here you still are.
Yes, I was a terrible interim.
But tell us the story, how you turned the school around, but also came up with this concept, because it relates to the others immediately, of the urban college model.
Sure. The first thing I'd like to say is anyone who is involved in being a part of a turnaround story, much of your success is based on timing. So for us, we had struggled for years, and the reality of it was it became easy to suggest new things because we were unencumbered by a history of success. Mm-hmm. So we were able to look at things from a fresh set of eyes and say, what makes sense? If we were going to redesign an institution to really speak to the needs of the communities we represent, what would make sense? And so we really came across this idea of an anchor institution model that used the institution to address the needs of the community, less as an academic enterprise and more as an experiential learning one, with the theory that if you involve the students in solving the problems of the communities they come from, that instead of being based on spending all their time talking about what they don't have and their deficits, you start from positions of strength. And we started out dealing with the things that we felt we could do something about. We added a dress code because we had to deal with the fact that our students weren't prepared to interview, they weren't prepared for business, and frankly, we didn't have any donors who would give us money, so we got people to give us clothes and then convinced them to give us money, right?
It was the entry-level drug.
It was the ultimate Trojan horse, right? Then we really looked at the academic offerings, and we said, what if we became a work college? And we stumbled on this because I was in a high school in Detroit recruiting, and they were a work high school. And
what does that mean?
So our students work between 10 to 20 hours a week in addition to go to class. And a lot of people would say, well, how can you do that? Because well, first of all, 85% of our students are Pell Grant eligible. So they're working already. Just like 75% of the college students today are working more than 20 hours a week anyway.
We should just explain, Pell Grants are the federal program for students with low income.
If you are in the lowest socioeconomic strata, you are eligible for Pell Grants, which provides you roughly almost $6,000 a year to help fund your education. It's a grant, not a loan. And so we realized that while our students weren't prepared for work because they came from backgrounds where people weren't working, all right, that if you qualify for Pell Grants, you have long-term unemployment and long-term underemployment. So we addressed that issue by designing a college where our students work. We reduced tuition and fees by $10,000. So the total cost to attend is $14,300. And we pay for it $5,800 with the Pell Grant, $5,000 with the work grant from the institution or from employers, another $1,200 from either state funds or federal funds. So a student only needs to borrow $2,300 a year to pay for their education and can graduate with less than $10,000. So 4 years of real-world work experience, 4 years of rigorous academic training, and debt less than $10,000, and being coached in how to engage in the issues of the day in your community.
And the community itself, describe for people, I mean, from what I've read, you're in a place where there's really nothing around you, and it's a food desert. And
so up until 2.5 months ago or 3 months ago, we were closer to the city garbage dump than we were a grocery store, and it had been like that for 20 plus years. We have a stray dog problem in the community. Literally, that's a whole nother conversation. But there's not much investment going on there. And the story that you heard over and over and over again was it's too hard. We don't think there are enough rooftops. There are 5,500 people in that community, in that zip code, and they deserve a place to eat. You know, and we drew attention to that by cutting our football program and turning our football field into an organic farm. And, you know, it didn't make our football players happy, right? But
they weren't headed for the NFL.
I want to be compassionate, right? But I will say this, we have sent more kale to the NFL than we have sent football players, right? But it's about looking at your circumstances from a position of power and not a position of weakness. As long as you have one string, you can play some type of symphony. Play the symphony you can with the string you have.
Mr. Williams, the community aspects of this, really what you are spending, as I understand it, a lot of your energies on. When President Sorrell says, you know, nobody was paying attention, you feel that that's true for an awful lot of the Dallas students, particularly in South Dallas.
I do. You know, our region, our scope is Dallas County, and it's 15 school districts and 35 different charter school networks, and a lot of people working very hard to do the best they can, but not really, one, being as supported as they could be, and secondly, operating sometimes in silos. And then when you layer in the foundation community, which again is a very generous community here in Dallas, but I think didn't, as much as they would like, have access to really cogent strategies that said, the data says, if you look at our educational pipeline, as a pipeline that ultimately leads into workforce, where are the biggest leaks in the pipeline occurring, and how do we align actions of all the different players in the community, including the foundation community, to really try and solve those leaks. So part of that is just kind of sometimes I refer to what we try and do as a little bit of consulting or management consulting that never leaves. We're always there, but also I think we're trying to bring also more attention to the issue. When I left the private sector to do this job, I was amazed by the lack of information and knowledge across our community about what certain parts of our city were able to, what the food deserts, the income levels, the household levels, the school outcomes, and I really spent a fair amount of time trying to influence people of influence and resources that if we don't do something now in a very meaningful and systemic way, our community is not going to look like what you want it to look like 10, 15, 20 years from now.
A meaningful and systemic way in the public schools.
Focusing on the public schools, and also working on public school feeding into higher ed, and then the private pre-K system feeding into K through 12. How do you get those systems aligned, if you will, to work in a more productive fashion?
And in terms of the public schools feeding into higher ed, you told me that there are some comprehensive high schools that have 2 years of college.
Yeah, one of the most innovative things that's going on is this concept of early college, where you effectively enroll kids in college in 9th grade at their public high school. And Dallas ISD, to their credit, has reallocated around $35 million of budget toward this effort so that you can graduate at the end of high school with not only a high school degree, but also up to 2 years of college credit, which obviously then allows you to graduate 2 years after that with a 4-year degree with much less debt than you otherwise would. It's also a very creative way of embedding corporate partners. I think DISD now has 45 corporate partners, Accenture, Southwest Airlines, Plains Capital Bank, a lot of names that you would recognize who agree and are providing internships, mentorships, and first job opportunities for people who have a 2-year degree or a technical certificate. And so it makes high school and early college feel real to the kids in terms of why am I doing this? I see an outcome.
And how's it working?
Again, it's just started. This was the very first year that they've really expanded. Early colleges in general, we haven't had as many as we'd like, but they have generally had 2 to 3 times the 6-year college completion rate than coming from just a normal comprehensive high school. But I think what's most exciting is that, for example, of the 10,000 kids who are entering the 9th grade in Dallas ISD, 5,000 kids signed up for this program. We had 2,800 slots, and so we filled them. But I think how do we scale that is, again, more funding, and also making sure we've got enough teachers that are trained to teach those college-level courses.
And Mr. Flores, one of the things that concerns you is a question of teachers, but in especially bilingual teachers. You've said that you don't think that the city is keeping up with the changes in demography.
The university system basically has not produced an adequate supply not only of bilingual teachers, but also in other career paths. Maths and science, I think, was discussed earlier by Greg, and how much time and effort has gone into that. The last 20-some-odd years he's been doing it. And, you know, are we making any gains? Well, actually, we've made some gains, but on the other hand, our population growth is so dramatic for Latinos and those that are English language learners. And consequently, the university system is not able to produce that pool that we require, even though the state of Texas, in order to try and alleviate the problem, came up with an alternative certification program where somebody with a degree could eventually go through a system like a 90-day wonder to become an officer. And you put people like that in a classroom, and they're not ready to perform, to be honest with you, with only 90 days to maybe 100 days. So they have to continue, you know, during the year, going to night classes and in the summers and on and on and on. And I know that everybody also talks so highly about Teach for America, but then again, the turnover rate in Teach for America is not desirable. Quick turnaround. Sometimes they're culturally incompatible with the local community, have never worked inside an inner city school where there are problems. But I wanted to mention also the fact that when I first got here in the early 70s, there was a court order for the school system to desegregate. And that's what has caused a lot of problems for these kids now, 30-some or 40 years later. Because, again, in 76, there was a new court order. And consequently, all the Anglo parents took all the kids out of school and created all these other, or either went to religious schools or created schools or homeschooled. I think that has been also a problem for us. Now, one of the concepts for integrating people are all these magnet schools we're talking about. It didn't start necessarily with now, and I'm so happy that AT&T talked about pathways to technology. My organization, LULAC, has actually been a partner with Southwestern Bell and AT&T first and Southwestern Bell, and now AT&T for 40-some-odd years, basically focused on education. That is one of our core objectives, to get kids not only to stay in school, but get to go to college where Dr. Sorrell is going to make sure they go get a PhD, not just a college degree. And, you know, these kinds of things that I think we need to look at and we need to talk about. It's evident to me that in the school system sometimes there are institutional things that kick kids out of school. Right now the school system has been working on this concept called restorative justice, which you cannot. How can you suspend a kid in the first or second grade? How can you suspend a kid like that? Well,
explain to people what restorative justice is.
You know, it's just not, that's not what you do. I mean, you got to intervene, bring in resources, psychologists, child psychologists, others, to try to work with that child. Heaven knows we have about an 87% poverty rate in the school system. Everybody gets a free lunch. So we already know that we got to work extra hard. We receive every kid that shows up to school. The school system has to take care of them, unlike other schools who get to cherry pick who they want. You know, those with limited learning abilities, we don't get to pick them. They come and we try to treat You know, just like, and try to get them to where they can become productive citizens. But anyway, I think these are things that are affecting our community. I know that our population has grown so dramatically in the last census. We were like at about 9.8 million in the state of Texas out of 25. Dr. Murdoch projects that in the next 10 years, which is right around the corner here, we're going to be at 15 million for Latinos. And in the next 10 years, we're going to be at 25 million. With that comes a lot of kids that are English language learners. We probably have the largest English learner population in the state of Texas, right here in the ISD, and we have to deal with that.
Ms. Schaefer, you would argue, I think, that you need to deal with it long before they get to school. That the brain science that we're now seeing of infants is so dramatic. And what they learn as babies has such an impact going forward. So tell us about how you deal with that and what your programs are.
Well, I do believe that we've learned so much from the neuroscience, from the brain research about how significant those early years are. In fact, when you read a study and it says that 85% of a child's intellect, personality, and skill is cultivated by the age of 5. 85% of a child's intellect, personality, and skill is cultivated by the age of 5. You think about how can we waste those years? Or the fact that the actual architecture of a child's brain is formed based on or developed based on the kinds of sensory experiences that a child has, that those neural connections are really being formed. And if children don't have that kind of rich experience repeated over time, then that isn't happening. And so we can't really neglect the early years. They are so critical in forming, what happens in the future. Not to say children can't make up some of those things, but basically we want to catch it at the beginning when it's really critical. And I guess I have kind of a twofold path of interest. One, the early learning or early childhood education, and really making a case, being an advocate for what that means, as well as looking beyond our kind of K-12 formal education and thinking about what other assets are out there, such as museums. And having spent 25 years of my career at the Smithsonian as the executive director for their lab school and being the founding director for it, I really have some firsthand experience with what it means for museums to be a part of children's learning. And so I want to make a comment about kind of the early childhood piece first. And that is that so often we will have everyone, at least at this point in the conversation, saying, well, of course those early years are significant. Or we understand that children learn through play, but they don't really understand what that means. Now, as educators, many of you do. But it's surprising if you have a conversation with others outside of the field, they really, many of them, don't understand what it means, what the significance of those early years are. In fact, not to throw my students under the bus, but I've taught for UVA as an adjunct for the past 10, 12 years and doing social foundations of education. And we had this debate about early childhood education and how it fit in with different levels of education and where should we invest the money given that we have short, limited resources. And I was absolutely shocked by how little many of my college students at UVA, which is a very well-respected university, how little many of them understood what early childhood education was about and what was happening in those early years. And I'm thinking, if they don't know, that tells me that there are many others within our society who also do not know. So we need to do a better job at really communicating and advocating for that in the field. And then the second side of it is the museum side. If you ever work with museum professionals, museum educators, They want, more than anything, to be part of the conversation of education. I mean, museums have long been known as educational institutions, easily for more than a century. And education has been a part of their mission. But they aren't always part of the conversation when we're talking about how we provide access and equity to students and how we make a difference in the kind of learning that's taking place. And I think we need to really open our minds to new partnerships, new collaborations, and really bring museums into the conversation because they have incredible potential. They have incredible potential and they have the will. And so what we need to do is think about how to make that happen.
So President Sorrell, so you look at your kids. Most of them probably haven't been to museums.
Well, I don't know if I'd make that assumption. I mean, one of the realities of it is our students come from urban America. And in urban America, one of the things that people have generally been pretty good about, I mean, and I'll just use my experience. I grew up in Chicago. Now, I went to private schools in Chicago, but we recruit a lot in Chicago. And so my sister is a public school teacher there in Chicago, and her students are always going to, because they're amazing museums in Chicago. And, you know, one of the things that really makes the Perot Museum so special is if you come here during the day, you see students from all over the Metroplex, right? I mean, it is a rainbow in here, and it is beautiful to see. And to your point, you never know what aspect of a museum touches a child. My son, for the past 2 summers, has come to camp here. And it's fascinating to hear him talk about, you know, what he's learned and just how he's learned it. But I think the thing that we have to make sure is available is the ability to get to the museums. Right? So you have these amazing museums, but because we don't have the money for transportation, students are locked out simply because they can't get to them. And those are the things I think people would engage the museums, but we have barriers that have been created unintentionally, but barriers no less that I think have to be addressed.
So we're really dealing with so many issues and places sort of intersection in the educational systems that need resources and attention. Mr. Williams, I know this is one of your areas. When you look at that, when you hear what Mr. Flores says, when you hear what Ms. Schaefer says, and you look at what you're trying to do, and where do you put your energies and say, this is the place that we have to intervene?
I would say this. I think it's so clear, and when you talk to people and you look at the data and the facts, we can solve this.
Yeah.
We know that if we bring every child to school ready for school, we know if we put an effective, well-trained, well-prepared educator in front of them, we know that when they get to high school, if high school feels real to them because we've put in early college, mentorships, etc., and we create structures such as a work college or early college that makes college affordable, we have the ability to transform our region despite the fact that 3 in 4 kids are qualified for free and reduced lunch. And we're the #1 city in the country in child poverty. Right. So we know what we need to do. The question is whether or not our city thinks that those kids are their kids. I think that they're our kids. Everybody up here thinks that these kids are our kids. The question is whether or not we've got the political will to pound the table and say we're going to do something about it. Because kids don't need equal resources, they need equitable resources. They need to be on a level playing field. And if they're coming in behind, then we should be incredibly intentional about providing them the resources that allows them to catch up as soon as possible, because it's the best dollar that we can spend.
And let's be honest about this, right? We had a problem with this before the current administration.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh,
I mean, so we're sitting here with 88% of our students being Latino, and are we not supposed to have that conversation now? Right? I mean, are we not supposed to address the needs that come with that? Because I mean, 20% of my student population is Hispanic, and we're having some very real conversations about what's necessary to protect them so that they can learn, right? I mean, and so we were behind before, and I am just petrified about what it means to have 88% of the city students be part of an ethnic group that is now feeling threatened. I mean, that's going to have an impact on what this city looks like in a way that is going to test our political will.
We're talking about bathrooms and vouchers, and we should talk about investing in kids with strategies that work.
That's exactly right.
I wanted to add that her presentation, that all the research indicates that if we invest in early childhood, particularly universal pre-K, that's going to reap benefits down the road. Legislators know that. I know that Dr. Murdoch goes before the legislature to advise them.
Who is Dr. Murdoch? For those
He's a state demographer. He's at Rice. He's got about 8 books on demographics. I mean, he's the guy when you want to go to.
If you want to get scared, just read the books.
Right.
But I think that unfortunately sometimes the people responsible to make sure that they fund education adequately in order for us to get the desired results. You know, again, the will is not there. They want to do other things. You know, we had in 2011, we took a big hit with a $5 billion deficit for education. That hurt. We lost a lot of teachers in the process. And we probably lost kids in the process. You know, everybody I think has heard about the school to prison pipeline. You know, it costs probably more to house an inmate in a penitentiary than send a guy to Harvard. You know, I mean, if we would try to work in a different way, new concepts to try to put them, you know, through educational programs, or at least if they're coming back to our community, give them something that they can come and use to be able to afford family and pay and have a job, you know, a meaningful job with a salary that can afford a home and all those kinds of things. I think we're looking at it. You know, we're not want to pay attention. We just want to get rid of them too, and that's not what's going to help our community, and definitely not our city, and not our state, and our country. So we need to go back to the planning.
Point, right, about until we start seeing all of these students as our students. You know, we'll always look at them as someone else's problem. We won't fight the fights that need fighting. We'll fight the fights that we can stomach instead of the ones that we need.
Ms. Schaefer, Mr. Flores talked about the prison to the pipeline, school to prison pipeline. And one of the things we do know is that if somebody's not reading at the 3rd grade level in 3rd grade, that bigger prisons have to be built. Which is an astounding fact, but it's a fact. And so again, what does that say to you about when we get into this process and where we put the resources?
Well, I will admit up front that I'm biased about you know, what we need to do for younger students, and I say that because what we want to do is tap into the child's natural curiosity for learning. Children want to learn, as you know, as very young, and that's not something that we have to teach them. It's natural. But we need to cultivate it. We need to nurture it. We need to give them opportunities. We need to share their excitement. When they're intrinsically motivated to learn, then learning occurs more naturally. And we need to support them and be passionate about that. So we need good, excellent teachers. I totally believe that we need really good teachers who are in the classroom for the right reason, because they really care about and are engaging children in the process of learning. So you absolutely need those good teachers. But we want children to feel committed to learn because they love the process of learning. And I think there are ways that we can do that, whether it's with the additional resources with museums, whether it's the kind of programs that you can bring in, the arts, all of that. But I think that we need to start young at helping children see and be joyful in learning. The kids who are struggling to read in second and third grade are not coming to school joyful. And I think what we need to do is find ways to support and help them earlier before it becomes an impediment to their learning. It needs to be, they need to be supported at the very beginning, and with parent support too.
Right.
I mean, we need to help parents understand their role in supporting their children because they are their children's first teacher.
Can I interject something?
Sure.
So roughly 4 in 10 kids in Dallas County can answer, call it 3/4 of the questions right on their third grade literacy exam. So the fact that you're 8 or 9 and your path is made immeasurably different.
Say the number again, I'm sorry.
So roughly 4 in 10 kids can basically pass, be at a grade level in third grade
So
reading.
40%.
40%. And we need 60-something% of our kids to be getting a post-secondary degree,
Right.
and we're already at 40% by third grade, right? Yeah. So think about that math. But there's some systemic things that are going on within our system we have to think about. Testing starts in third grade. If you have an inadequate supply of effective teachers, guess where principals put their best teachers? In the tested grades. Guess where they put teachers that perhaps are really struggling? Early grades. Yeah. So we need Navy SEAL Team 6 in 5 and 6-year-olds. Back to the Navy, that's right. And instead, our system incentivizes exactly the opposite behavior. And the other thing I guess I'd say is I would ask everybody in this audience to be an advocate for a young man or woman to be a teacher. We have lots of kids who want to be teachers, and the adults talk them out of being a teacher. And the other thing I'd say, a systemic problem that we have, and we've seen the benefits of it here in Dallas, is that if you are a teacher and you know that every year I'm going to make $300 to $400 more than I made the prior year, regardless of how effective I am, teachers look for compensation in other ways. They want to get to a school that's got somewhat less poverty, perhaps more engaged parents. There's prestige for some teachers to get into a more affluent school district. And that's exactly the opposite of what we need. We need our best teachers in front of our kids who are behind the most. And so programs where we're paying our most effective educators $10,000, $15,000 more a year, if they will commit and go collectively to work in our most challenged schools where kids are most behind, are seeing 20, 30, 40-point gains. Now that requires a financial commitment.
Do you have that here? Do you have those kinds of programs?
We just implemented it we're in the second year of it. We just added another cohort, and they just agreed to do the same thing over in Fort Worth with 5 more schools. So finding out who our best teachers are and paying them to be in front of our kids who need them the most has got to be one of the key strategies that we employ in this work.
Do some of your students become teachers?
They do. We have actually one of our more effective programs is our teacher education program. And one of the things that we're most proud of is we stress cultural competency. Mm-hmm. Right? So
what does that mean?
So what it means is that if you are going to go into a community as a teacher, then you need to have an understanding of that community, of the mores of the community, of the rhythms of the community, of the practices, the habits of the community, of the people of that community. And what we discovered early on was that too many students were learning everything they had to know about the lesson planning and the books, and nothing about the communities that they were going into. Right. So they could only be effective to a certain point. Because if you have cultural competency, that means that you understand that school may have to stay open a little bit later because the families in your community work later. Mm-hmm. Right? The unintended consequences. I mean, one, our school system is set up for a society that doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
So we need teachers who can bridge that gap, and that's, in essence, cultural competency.
Can I just add that museums struggle with that same thing of cultural competency and have been over the last number of decades really trying to reach a more diverse audience than they were before, both in the kind of exhibitions they provide as well as how they communicate with and really engage people and help people feel that this is a place for them when they're from other cultures. And it's not an issue, and I'm not saying you're suggesting it, it's an issue that we all need to be thinking about in education, whether it's in our schools, in our museums, wherever. We need to really understand what we're doing in the context of the people we do it with.
But Mr. Flores, it's my impression that you feel that that's not happening in your community.
Well, I wanted to respond. Being in human capital management, I wanted to pick up on one thing, and that is that unfortunately in the school system, my experiences has been that when a teacher was not performing, they would farm her out to another school where that person did just as bad over there. And instead of going through a process of due process of dismissal, it was management just did not want to be involved in. It's a hard decision to fire somebody. And, it involves litigation sometimes. And the other thing that I recall is putting too many alternative certification, new kids coming in or new people coming in into some of these inner city schools that were already struggling to begin with.
What's alternative certification?
That's where the 90-day wonders.
Want to teach, when can you start, and a toll-free number.
I see.
Unfortunately, that happens in a big system like Dallas. With 10,400 teachers, $1 billion budget, 20,000 employees, 232 schools, you got to have people in place. And so sometimes people err in terms of deciding who would be the best person. Put them in there and we'll work with them and things like that. So I think we got to go back exactly, what we're doing in the whole process, not only the recruitment, but the selection and also the assignments, where they go. If they, my goodness, I mean, if you put a kid that's rural and put them in a big city school, I mean, there's gonna be conflicts, I can tell you. And I know some of the other situations I had in assigning people. I hired a lot of people from the Philippines, and they were math and science and physics and all that because we didn't have them in the pool. But unfortunately, they wanted all their students to stand up when they walked in. Well, our guys are not going to do that normally. And, things like that, you got to work with them, and help them. Discipline was a big issue. How do you met out discipline? Well, there's a lady, a PhD, Madeline Murray or Madeline Hunter, who really has, the books on discipline and how to get kids to buy in. And they make the rules, so they have to adhere to those rules because they made the rules. Sometimes they're tougher on themselves. Of course, the teacher who's there has to supervise and be able to implement those rules and things like that. But in a big city, we're talking about Dallas, a big city, okay, a big place. And it's not easy to survive in that place, particularly for young people.
So when you got to Paul Quinn, you found students who were not that well disciplined, but you turned it around. And this wasn't with babies, this was with teenagers or 20-year-olds, right? So what happens, so it's not all over, right? So what do you do?
Well, I think the reality of it is you establish a vision, you articulate that vision, you show people their role in that vision. Now, some people are going to buy in, and some people aren't. If you choose not to buy in, I think you have to be compassionate in the way in which you help people find schools in which they can buy into, right? But some of the best advice I ever got was from a woman named Evelyn Dickinson, who was there when I got there. And she told me, she said, people will never hear you if they don't understand you care about them. Mm-hmm. So you have to lead with love. And
this was after you were in a yelling match with the students.
This was after, you've heard the story, right? I was trying to clean it up. But I was a young president, got into a yelling match with a young man on the middle of campus. We continued to yell all the way up to my office. We get into the office, and we're still yelling, and he breaks down and cries. And, by that point, I was too engaged in the fight, right. So I couldn't.
You're ready to win.
Right, I was ready to win. I was like, I won, right? And
he's crying.
I didn't really know how to comfort him in that moment. And she was there, and after he left, she sat me down, and she said, listen, I met your mother, and I know your mother was tough. She said, but you have never spent 1 second of your life wondering if you were loved. She said, therefore, you could process tough love. She said, but if you've never known love, all you're going to hear is tough. Mm-hmm. She said, so if you want them to understand that you care, if you want them to understand what you're doing, you have to lead with love. And at that moment, I started communicating with my students differently, right? Like I will tell them, I love you. I will give them a hug. I will ask them, how are you doing? We talk about family things. I mean, we engage, and we've established a baseline. Now, it doesn't mean that they won't be punished, right? But they're punished from a place of compassion where they see it in the context of a bigger picture, right? This is part of the process in me becoming great. Because everything we do, we talk to them. There are rules, but these rules are designed to help you become great. And I think somewhere along the line, you know, I was part of a committee that the county judge established on truancy. And I was flabbergasted that in the most difficult truancy cases, people will bring in the police to take the kids away in handcuffs out of the classroom. Now,
yes, when they're being punished for not being in the
when
classroom.
they're being punished for not being in the classroom, right? And that's a horrible visual. And I'm really proud of the fact that the county judge wanted to do something about that and that those things are being changed. But I don't think we fully appreciate the images that we're sending. If you are from an under-resourced community where prison is part of the fabric of that community, your father may be in prison, your brother, your uncle, I mean, you know people who are there. The worst thing you can do is criminalize that behavior in that way. And I just think that we have to invest more in treating our students as if they actually are our students. And that has made a big, big difference for us.
And is that something that's replicatable down the line?
Absolutely.
The rest of you see it that way?
It's training. It's training. It's creating a culture, and it's training and leadership.
The other thing that you've talked about at your school is we over me.
Yes.
And I think that in a conversation about rights, that's a very interesting concept because this country has always had this complicated relationship between individual liberties and the community. And you have made a very strong statement that it's going to be the community.
No, well, so I believe, I went to a Jesuit high school.
Wow.
They told us we were to be men and women for others, right? They were very clear about that. My parents were very clear about that. There is tremendous strength in lifting, right? Lifting all of us, lifting us in a way that supports us, that nurtures us, that enriches us, that you don't have to compete about everything. And we tell our students, the needs of the community supersede the wants of an individual. You don't get to be selfish. We coach them to be leaders. Leadership is an inherently selfless act, or it should be a selfless act, right? And so reminding them, if you come to our campus, and which you are welcome, we would love to have you come visit, you will see on our walls, we over me. You will see that's our mantra. And it is, I understand the obsession with personal liberties, but I also understand that we are a country of immigrants, right? We are a country that told people, bring us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. The idea of welcoming people to your country is a selfless act. So all we are doing, all we are attempting people to do is to buy into the dream that is the America that we believe in. And we won't apologize for that, and we will fight to preserve that right and that culture.
And Mr. Williams, that gets me to sort of one of my hobby horses, which is that the dream, the American dream, relies on public education. It relies on the idea that there's equal access to a good education for all of our children. Otherwise, it doesn't work in terms of the American dream. So, again, where do we put our efforts?
Well, we don't have equal access today. Nothing even that resembles it the way we would want it to be. You know, I grew up in a time where I had access to great public school teachers. I didn't come from any money, but I knew that, and I had access to 100% financial aid. And those two things made huge differences in my life. And we've made college much more expensive. We don't finance it the way that we should. And we have basically created, I mean, give you a sense, I think the number is something like 70% of our schools in our region are more than 70% poor. So we are concentrating poverty. And one of the most effective strategies that's been shown to be effective is to integrate our schools by both by race and by economics, because there's what's called the Coleman effect, which is peers who come from different backgrounds learn from each other in different ways. But equally important, I always, there's schools out there that may be, and I see it in both races. So my wife and I are associated with a charter school that's 98% Hispanic, low-income children, and they are pushed to go to college. They go to college, and when they get to college, and for the first time in their life, they're at a school where they're not 98% Hispanic, and they struggle with that concept. And the same way with the concept with students who come from primarily white schools, and then basically work in the community, they don't know, they're not culturally competent, right? So it's to all of our benefit that our schools be integrated. And I think one of the key strategies also of strong early childhood is that if you as a parent believe that your children, all children in that school are ready and ready to grow together, then you don't really have any fear that ultimately my kid may not get as much attention because they're going to be focused on kids who are behind, right? Let's just make them all ready from the very beginning. I just think this is a fundamental, and I'm scared to death for our democracy, because you see what's happening today, and the fact that facts don't matter anymore, it's all alternative facts, and I just don't know who, for my sake of my kids, who are going to be their fellow citizens, their fellow voters, their fellow employees, their fellow, hopefully, neighbors. If we don't think that we have a stake in everybody's kid, I don't know what our society is going to look like.
I'm going to turn it back for questions. Everybody's got one of these, and if you could fill out questions, and we will also, if I can see you, get questions if you want to stand up and ask a question. There is a microphone wandering around somewhere.
Ms. Roberts?
Yes, please.
I wanted to bring the subject of dual language for all kids. I think it's probably a skill that our country requires. Coming from a law enforcement background, I know that after 9/11, we did not have people prepared with Middle Eastern languages that were in law enforcement. Consequently, we had to go and contract people. We didn't even know if we could trust them to actually interpret those things to our benefit.
Because we didn't know what they were saying.
Right. You know, and I think that our country normally wants everybody to learn English in the world, but we do not want to learn the other languages of the world. And I think that in the public schools in Dallas in particular, they have these dual language schools, maybe 16 to 30 of them now, and all kids that are in the public school can opt to go there and be able to pick up another language. I know there are some competitor schools that are out there that actually, they do not only Spanish and English, but Mandarin Chinese. I mean, I think these are the kinds of things that we need to be talking about also as part of any curriculum in the public schools. I know that every group coming to our country has been uplifted by the public schools. That has brought every group forward, and we should continue that. But you have to fund them, but you also have to have those curriculums so that we can compete in a global economy.
Well, that was really the point that I was making, is that you can't really have people succeed and fulfill the dream that they have come here to fulfill without having the schools be someplace where they can. So, do we have some questions coming in here? Yeah.
So Martin Luther King Jr. in his letter from Birmingham jail said, "I am sure that none of you would want to rest content with a superficial kind of social analysis that deals merely with effects and does not grapple with the underlying causes." Too often when we hear about education and we hear about the issues affecting especially Black and Hispanic students, we talk about the pipeline that you were referring to, Mr. Williams. But we don't talk enough about what it says on the screen, rights and justice. So I'm curious, Mr. Williams, why is it that you're so quick to talk about what's wrong with the schools and talk about just what the schools can do better without talking about the injustices like redlining, like the HUD federal lawsuit in Dallas right now, talking about the school-to-prison pipeline? For example, AT&T gets a lot of praise for donating a lot of money, but they hired prison labor in the 80s and 90s, funded ALEC, and profited off of people who were in mass incarceration. So can you talk more about what those injustices are and why you don't speak more about them both in your scorecard as well as the other issues or whenever you talk publicly about these things?
Oh, Christian, you can call me Todd because you used to work with me. I think that there's the behavior of my parents, grandparents, and their parents is either through actions or silence created a situation of have and have-nots, access and not access, and we all ought to be accountable for it. You cannot defend it. You have to figure out how to fix it going forward. But at the end of the day, one of my roles, clearly in this work, is as someone who is viewed to be a person of privilege, and am privileged because I had access to a quality education growing up, even though I didn't have any income growing up, is to basically make sure that people who are my peers within my influence understand that what has happened in the past and how it is that we have to continue to work collectively together to solve it. If we spend a lot of time pointing fingers at each other without trying to figure out how to deal with it collectively, we're not going to solve this problem. We may feel a little bit better, and we have to all acknowledge what we've collectively as a society allowed to be perpetuated upon different races of our society. We should apologize for it. We need to apologize for it. But at the end of the day, we also have to move forward in a constructive way based on some of the strategies that we talked about, and we have to fund those strategies. So I don't think it's either or. I think it's acknowledgement, apology, and then a resolve to work together and try and get past the scars that we all bear through the actions of our predecessors.
So it's pretty clear that
No,
you haven't been
all right.
trained.
Okay. Sir, we're not having a debate between you and Mr. Williams. This is a general conversation with the rest of the audience. This question is, how should districts better support teacher success? My daughter in spring is responsible for over 100 students in high school English. Her low-income school is filled with struggling students who are not prepared or receiving support at home. The teacher burnout rate is very high.
Let me interject on that. The data is incredibly troubling. Today, roughly 1 in 3 teachers coming into the system as a brand new teacher was trained in higher education. 2 of the 3 are trained through alternative certification, which is where you take, and most of these, the biggest producers of alt-cert teachers in our state produce 10 times more the biggest higher ed. You can take 5 weeks of online courses. You can take the test as many times as you need to take to pass it. You never have to actually be inside a classroom to be culturally competent, to actually have worked in a school, and you get the keys to lead a classroom. Now, a high-end private school or Highland Park is not going to hire you. But if you're a low-income, high-poverty school who needs a teacher on the 4th Thursday of August to fill a need to have a, quote, qualified teacher, you will get hired. You will not have a mentor, you will have poor induction, and likely, potentially within 30 to 60 days, you will quit because you weren't trained. And then we will place a $100 a day substitute teacher for you with the rest of the school year. And we allow that system to keep going. We don't say, stop, this is crazy. We would not allow our own child, particularly if I'm talking about someone who lives in North Dallas or sends their child to a private school, to put up with that. So why do we put up with that? Because it's a child that we don't know.
The discussion's emphasis has revolved around improved systems within education, but almost nothing has been said about social and emotional health. Given the success of the Momentous Institute, how is this not the priority? I think you need to explain about the Momentous Institute first and then talk about it. I don't know anything about the Momentous Institute.
You want to? Go ahead. I can.
Yes. The Momentous Institute is really, I think, as appreciated as it is in the city, I still think it's one of the underappreciated gems that we have. And it's really doing some pioneering work around the emotional health of students and how helping them be whole and the impact that that has in every aspect of their life. I don't know if that's really the best technical explanation of it. But what I can say is that we are seeing at the college level significant gains in student performance when the emotional and mental health is treated. We recruit a significant number of students from Chicago, and the first year we did that, every high school we went into in Chicago had someone who had been shot that school year, right? And the students were living with that specter of violence in them. We thought, well, we'll get them to Texas. It's a safe place. Everything will be better. And we were stupid. Right? We got them here, and then all of the issues came raining down. Depression, post-traumatic stress, all of it. And so we had an unhealthy student population. Then we had unhealthy staff. And thankfully, we partnered with University of Texas Southwestern, and came up with this really innovative program about studying the effects of poverty on mental health and how treating it, spurs academic performance. And it's everything, right? It is everything. It is to watch the difference it makes. And students in our campus have the ability to raise their hand and say, I need to talk to someone. I need help. So there's no stigma attached to it. And it has made an extraordinary difference.
Ms. Schaefer? Yeah, I was going to say it's really interesting in listening to this conversation how many things are a very important or critical part of the early childhood field, but yet they also apply to every other level of education, and yet we don't give it the same onus. So for early childhood, we look at not only the cognitive development, but the physical, the social, the emotional, all of that. And we know that education is not something, the learning cannot be just a part of what happens in that classroom between the teacher and the child, the children, one child and another, but it is one part of a larger component, which is why Head Start, brings in parents and looks at, the health of the child and makes sure that they're checked for, being well and all of that. And I think that so often what we try to do is we move from this holistic approach to supporting learning in our world at the earlier ages to a much more kind of, narrow perspective as you get older and older. Well, it's about the content, it's about learning the physics, it's about this, it's about what happens, between the teacher and the student, and that's it. But it's not, it's the parents, it's the, community, what's happening, what these children are going through in terms, kind of the Maslow theory of, you have to be safe to be able to be comfortable enough to learn and pay attention. So I think that all of the things that we value so highly in the early childhood years, we need to think more about, how we can carry on that respect for every child at the early years and how we want them to be the we instead of the me, and carry that forward, not because, we're babying anybody, but because they're important ideals in terms of how one treats one another and engages with one another. We need others to be able to get along, kind of the rules we teach kindergartners and preschoolers. I'm hearing some of those in some of the success of what you do, respect for one another. So I think it's important to think about that.
Well, coming right out of that notion of getting to narrower and narrower as opposed to more holistic, is this question, which says, would you provide your opinion about the recent Texas requirement to have high school students to declare a major in middle and high school? Is this something real? I mean, does this exist? Is there a Texas requirement to have people declare a major?
I think you're asked to declare a career pathway beginning at the beginning of ninth grade.
I would have been in real trouble.
It's not binding, but it obviously determines the classes that you can take. And again, I think part of the challenge of our system is, again, the trade-off and the breakdown between K-12 and higher ed, and how do we make very clear pathways for kids to understand how to navigate that process and get appropriate supports to navigate it, particularly when they go into the community college system. The average student, I think in DCCD, the community college system here, takes 90 hours to graduate with an associate's degree that should take 60. And part of that problem is advice and counseling and support to make sure that they're not taking on undue debt, to make sure that they're navigating that process well. And so I think one of the things collectively our community needs to do better is to create a much more of a bigger counseling and support function. Again, because high schools across America, but certainly high schools in Texas, are really held accountable for high school graduation. We're now number 2 or number 3 in the nation in terms of high school graduation rates, but we're not the college readiness rates that we want to be. But because high schools don't feel accountable for basically making sure that kids enroll and persist and complete in college, we staff counselors at 1 to 400 or 1 to 500. Yeah. And if you're primarily low-income, first-generation students, you need much more support than what one counselor for working with 500 kids can provide.
You know, the problem with asking students to identify so early is one of exposure.
Sure.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so here's the difference. When you are in an under-resourced community and you stumble across this bright, passionate student that's interested in science, they will tell you, I want to be a physical therapist or I want to be a nurse, right? Because they don't know any doctors. And so when you ask them, have you ever thought about being a doctor? Oh, it just seems too hard. Or I don't know any doctors. And then when you pry a little deeper, you realize they've been coached down instead of lifted up. And so when you ask them to pick early without exposing them,
this was traditionally true for women.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I was even talking about exposure in another way of how do you know what you want to be until you've learned enough stuff to figure it out?
That's exactly right.
So, well, getting to that question of accountability, and this is, of course, the hot question in a lot of places, is does standardized testing help or hurt the learning process? Teaching for the test. This is, what do you all think about? Mr. Flores, you want to take that one? Standardized test?
That's not my expertise, but I've heard that, for one, that it should not be just a test. It'll be the test plus other things in terms of the assessment itself. What teachers observe, what even the principal when they observe, or maybe the counselor and other people like that, it ought to be a multiple, here's a guy here, there's a testing guru right here. But it takes more than one individual test, I think. Scary. And then you're going to damage that kid if you're just going to depend on that. You should not be teaching to the testing because basic skills that they need are not going to be learned. And that's a big issue. The other thing I wanted to mention, can you imagine trying to remove algebra from a high school curriculum when the research indicates that those that take algebra are going to finish college? This is the kind of thinking that goes in the legislature, okay?
Yeah, well, it's only in session every other year.
They're the ones that need some mental help there.
But what I've seen in recent years on this question of the testing is that it's the more affluent families who are complaining about it and opting out of it, and that it's become in some cities very much a civil rights issue. Of the minority families saying, wait, how do we know whether our schools are serving our kids without doing the testing?
I think the question is, I don't think anyone believes that we shouldn't assess knowledge in terms of whether or not our students are learning what we hope that they'll learn. The question is the accountability associated with the assessment. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes the accountability becomes so high stakes that people make decisions that they know in their gut isn't the right decision for kids, but it's the right decision for what the system is incentivizing. We shouldn't be putting our better teachers in later grades if we know that we need our best teachers in the early grades for kids who are behind. That's what the system incentivizes. So I agree that we should be having multiple assessments, not just one test given in April or May of each year. And I think that we need to lower the stakes of those tests. And I think that I would rather us focus on
Lower the stakes, meaning the teachers aren't judged by them?
Well,
or
let me say it differently. I think if we spent more time increasing the rigor of who could be a teacher and prepared them well, and spent less time trying to ferret that out through high-stakes tests, and then compensate them and give them the prestige that the profession deserves, I don't think we would. I mean, kids who go to high-quality private schools, they have end-of-year assessments. They do.
Right.
In every grade.
Right.
But it's not the test that determines the whole ranking of the school, right? And sometimes
Although those schools are very nervous about state tests and all of that.
well, they are nervous, but I think it's the single high-stakes nature of it that causes educators to then give 17 benchmark tests before you actually take the real test that really takes away from the fun of learning.
And if, I was going to say, you know, if you go back to kind of what testing should be about, or it's about evaluation, if I can really understand what it is that this student knows and what he or she might need a little help on, I can use that test to better inform my teaching so that that supports the student. And I think that we've gotten a little bit mixed up here about the, you know, what evaluation is really good for, and maybe we're using it, you know, maybe we're using it in ways that aren't really what it should be. I just think we should always think about what's in the best interest of the child, and you know, and again, we need good teachers, and I don't want to, you know, diminish the importance of how we need to support teachers. That's not it at all. But I do think we need to think about what good does this do for a child if we use testing in this way.
So let us finish here with that question that someone from the cyberspace asked at the end of the last session. What makes you optimistic? Quickly, each. Go ahead, Mr. Flores, you start.
Well, one thing, as was mentioned earlier, graduation rates are higher than they were before. Dropout rate has disappeared. I mean, these were big issues, say, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We used to track all of these things. I think there are some good movements. There's upward mobility, without a doubt. But what do we do with those kids getting into college, as was mentioned here earlier? I think we need to concentrate as much now when they get into college, because for sure minorities are dropping out of college when they get there after the second, maybe third year. So we need to see what's going wrong, and I think it's been said, we need counseling, we need peer group support, we need programs to help keep them there, tutoring or whatever it takes to keep them there, because they're going to be a very valuable asset to this country. We need to invest in that, and I don't think we're doing exactly that. I heard a comment from one of my colleagues who's a PhD counselor, and he was trying to educate me about some of these things, and I could understand a little bit better why we have to now concentrate on getting not only our kids out of high school, but into college. And I think the other element, too, is how we can get kids into a 2-year degree, like applied sciences, like now the community colleges are doing with all these students, but also vocational type that are high dollar. I know how much the air conditioning guy charges me to get to my house, and he haven't done anything yet, you know? I mean, at least $90. You know, I mean, I think we need to think about that, and then not keep them out of the college loop either, but only so they can pay their way through college or the university system. I think we need to think about those things that we can train kids with skills, technology skills, obviously. And but I think those are the things. I'm optimistic.
One program that's actually been tried in the area where I live that's been very successful is what they call posses. And where they surround a kid in college with a posse. And it really does help to keep the kid there. You know,
our name was study group. We always had a study group on the top. And you know, believe it or not, you know, in high school you got to do everything by yourself, right? They don't believe in having your branch or a team or what have you. But in college, right away you learn. because you miss out on stuff when you're listening to your professor give a lecture. He's not going to repeat it, or her. And so if you have different of your friends actually helping, then you get back together and, rehash everything that was said, and you go out and do, more reading and stuff. But I think those are things that obviously can help our kids.
Ms. Schaefer?
I think I'm most passionate about and optimistic about the educators that are not only in our schools but outside of our schools, and how, if we just looked for those opportunities to work together, that the experiences that students have could really be enriched. And I look back at some of my warmest moments with young children. It's that kind of crossover. My real quick story is I was doing some work with a Head Start program in Washington, D.C., where they were taking children to the Corcoran and Art Gallery. And none of the children had ever been, they did a survey, none of the children or their families had ever been to an art museum. And so after about the third visit to the Corcoran, one little boy who had been somewhat, disengaged in what was going on in the classroom came back to the classroom, and he was very excited, and he said to his teachers, he said, "When I grow up, I want to be the person who picks the paintings, puts them on the wall, and talks to other people about them." And I think about the kind of broadening horizons, the opportunities to, kind of the what you were talking about with, you're not thinking about being a doctor because that's not part of the narrative. But children who wouldn't have this narrative without more diverse experiences and opportunities. And we just can't put on blinders and think that every solution is within the formal structure of the school. We've got to work together more broadly. And I'm optimistic that that can happen because there are people out there that want to do it.
I would say that I'm more optimistic than I've ever been. And I think that's really driven by a few things. I think that our community here in Dallas is really rallying behind some of the more innovative strategies in the country that are occurring here, whether it's school choice in terms of in-district school choice, or the incredible importance of pre-K, or the incredible importance of training teachers, or a whole host of different things. And I think that our foundation community is really rallying around this, and frankly, our high net worth philanthropist community is really rallying around education. It felt like 10 years ago in our city it was about the arts. Today I feel like it's about education. And so whether it's AT&T or the Dallas Foundation or CFT or many of the larger foundations in this region, I think they all want to get behind this because they realize that Dallas isn't going to be the city that we want unless we do something in a very constructed and strategic way.
For me, what gives me hope is student activism. The fact that we are in the midst of students who are using their voices in a very effective way, in a very concentrated way. I mean, we saw that with South Oak Cliff High School, and the fact
I
that...
don't know what that story is.
So, South Oak Cliff High School is a school in the southern part of the city, in an under-resourced community, and its building literally was falling apart. And the independent school district wanted to give them, 30, was it 30 or 40 million?
15 million.
It started off being 15 or 20, and then it kept growing. Yeah.
And it kept growing, and finally the students just stood up and advocated for themselves, engaged other members of the community, and demanded more and demanded better. And we are seeing that increasingly, that students are saying, this is about us. We want a seat at the table. We deserve a seat at the table. And I think it's fantastic.
Well, that's great. Well, thank all of you very, very much for sitting at this table. And we appreciate you being here tonight, and all of you for joining us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was great to be with you.
I want to thank the panels, both panels, and especially Cokie for your wonderful job in stimulating the conversation. I want to thank Dallas for your support, your interest in the quality of your questions, and your level of attention. It's very much appreciated. This was one of the best of our conversations to date. I should remind you, we thanked AT&T earlier. AT&T has supported each one of these conversations, and will be supporting the wrap-up in the spring as we move into the culminating event. So keep your eyes open for that one. It will be televised, and it'll be a great wrap-up to this series. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, David.